Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the DD Geopolitics podcast. I am joined once again. Lydia is finally back from vacation. And of course, JM, as per usual. Today, we're going to talk about the clashes between the East and the West BRICS and what is going on with this Ukrainian counteroffensive. Lydia, how was vacation?
The vacation was great. I'm very jet lagged. And as you know, sane people, when they're on vacation, they try to stay away from news, but I am not sane, which is why I read all the news. So I will try to keep up.
I will attest to that, Lydia. I didn't really notice that she was on vacation. She was very much available and around. So she was definitely paying attention. JM, how was your week?
Oh, a normal one. Just being me.
Of course. All right, so let's talk about it. First things first is the Baltic states, JM's favorite region of the world. The Baltic states, Kaya said that they would be disconnecting from Russian energy, and not at the end of 2025, but at the beginning of 2025.
Oh,
That was
wow, oh no.
right. And so I'm just kind of confused because maybe JM can enlighten us, but what is going to be the plan? Because they are so dependent on Russian energy.
Oh, the plan's very simple. Just import a lot of very, very high-priced liquefied natural gas from the United States. That is the plan.
It's very
I know there's an awkward silence. I know there's an awkward silence,
Well,
but
I'm just pondering this statement because seriously, because it sounds kind of suicidal, which
Yes.
is why I was quiet because I was pondering that idea in shock. I mean, it is what they're about to do, I feel like, but it is very
Here's the
not
thing
very
about the
smart.
Baltic states is that America loves the Baltic states in terms of uh, strategically. They love to have the Baltic states, and the Baltic states reciprocate that love right back. So, I mean, that's a great plan and all, but I don't know that America loves the Baltic states enough to give them a price that's not going to absolutely destroy their economy.
but what economy really do the Balts have? I know that we like engaging in taunts on the
Right.
Baltic states. We love calling them chihuahuas. We like reminding them that they're not very important on social media. I often like taunting them, "Hey, Baltics!" and, reminding them about Jonas Noreka, the Lithuanian Patriotic Front, the Latvian Legion, the Eighth Zargi, the Omakaitse. These are all going from south to north, the various collaborationist groups, movements that worked with the Nazis. And yes, they did work with the Nazis, and that murdered most of the Jews in the Baltic states without the Germans needing to devote too much manpower to it. The Balts took care of that for them. They also provided a lot of the manpower for anti-partisan operations in Western Russia, so around Pskov, also to do more things in Belarus. If you've seen Come and See, you know what that looks like. And so when the Balts act like they're a bunch of victims, well, it's not just, a chihuahua, it's a rabid chihuahua that has attacked and tried to kill someone, but that for some reason has not been put down.
Oh my
We
God.
love we love to put we love to we love to point this out, and we like to highlight their hypocrisy. We like to point out that in terms of the balance of power, they mean very little. But let's get serious, just as I was there by pointing out the collaborationist formations. We go, but there's nothing very funny about mass murder and trying to eliminate entire ethnic groups from your territories because you think that because, the Balts have a very, very high proportion of blue eyes, that they're blue eyes entitle them to suddenly live like they imagine people in Western Europe do, as opposed to how, Western Europe is a very, very lovely place, but it's still a place with problems. That more to the point, the Baltic states are really do survive by falling into the cracks of the global economy and by exporting labor. So yeah, if you look at GDP, they have a very high GDP per capita, but a lot of that is once again from, from banking and being tax havens, and not every country can be a tax haven, and banking doesn't employ that many people. They also have very threadbare labor protections, and there is problems with domestic employment. Like all the way back, at least in the last figure I can remember from, but it was 2020, so I'm sorry about that. It's a bit out of date. But the unemployment rate in Lithuania was 9%, if I recall correctly.
Wow.
9%. In Russia, it was 5%. And this is 2020, so this is in the midst of COVID. And obviously, Russia is now at full employment. And Russia is at full employment when actually there is a net immigration into Russia because people from Central Asia, or even, don't say it, including the Baltic states and Ukraine, want to come to Russia because there are jobs there and they speak the language.
Very
Whereas,
true.
so the Baltic states, yes, they look impressive. Like in terms of if you look at the cities on the outside, it looks very impressive on paper. But in terms of what these people actually have to offer, and these places have to offer, not very much. And it's also a case of, oh no, a bunch of states with a combined population of tick 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 tick, at most 6 million people, and that's probably being generous, are not going to buy natural gas from Russia anymore. Oh no, whatever will Russia do when it has economies that are growing rapidly, like China and India, with over 1 billion people who want to buy their gas and oil? Whatever is Russia going to do to replace this hole in its heart and its wallet?
Well, I think that's where I always get confused about the Baltics, is because, and that's, I'm not looking at it from a lens of like, is this going to hurt Russia? I'm looking at it as how much is this going to really hurt the Baltics? I mean, Estonia alone, I know in 2020, 100% of their solid fossil fuels and natural gas came from Russia. So we're talking, again, you brought up the population. We're talking about an area with a population less than New York City. So obviously that's like swatting a tick off a horse's back. Like Russia doesn't care. But I just can't really understand the willingness to hurt yourself and your population so badly to get in the good graces of America. And the Baltics have always acted in those interests, in the interests of America, more so than I can say for most other states in Eastern Europe.
Well, you know how we say in Russia, we have this saying to freeze one's ears off to hurt your grandma, which basically, which is basically what a lot of these countries are doing. They're essentially doing all these things to hurt Russia, which, if you look at it this way, it is what it is. And they're doing more harm to themselves than good. But if they want to do that, they can. And Jam just answered all of my questions because I was actually sitting here wondering what is their economy.
Right. I mean, me too. I know that Estonia has a very big tech sector and a very good intel community, but that's not an export, And those are talking about contractual obligations and stuff like that. That's not hard export. So yeah, I don't know a lot about the Baltics in terms of their present day economic status. I do know about their activities during World War II, but that's just because that's my self-study area. But yeah. So I was kind of wondering the same, like what's going to make up for this huge gap?
Well, the only thing that I guess I kind of disagree with Jam on is, and I felt attacked a little bit as I usually do on these podcasts. Is I absolutely do believe that people with blue eyes deserve a special status and special treatment. just throwing it out there.
Okay,
I feel it's only fair.
I'm gonna actually second that.
Thank you.
And then if they have dark hair, they should get extra points.
Definitely, definitely.
Well, we've agreed. And then, so then we've got the Estonia or the Baltics kind of maneuvering and like continuing their movement towards the west. And now I'm going to bring up JM's actual favorite country in the world, which is France, who asked to participate in BRICS. Why? And what does this mean, JM? Especially, do you think that they want to participate in BRICS because Algeria put in a bid to join?
I think they probably just want to break things up and try and insert themselves, but unlike the British, where they're going to start lying to everybody, the French actually, when they attempt to break things up and insert themselves into situations, they try to do so through charm rather than just by being that annoying little guy who you wondered, why did I invite him to this party? Uh, but they got turned down, I think, because geopolitically, they have absolutely nothing to do with BRICS. BRICS, after all, is at bottom an organization made up of major states which wants to find some way of ensuring that their national sovereignty can be upheld and also the ability to just do trade without being excessively interfered by the way the global system has currently been run. And when we say the global system, we inevitably mean the Western dominated global system. And we and BRICS actually, goes up, it goes down in terms of how solid it is, and we can see some of this with the fact that Vladimir Putin was effectively disinvited from attending the BRICS summit in South Africa because to do so would have put the South African government in a very awkward situation because the Democratic Alliance Party of South Africa, which by the way I looked up in our research for this program, and oh boy is it interesting, the Democratic Alliance Party filed, a suit that if Putin were to land in South Africa, they would need to comply with the Rome Statute, South Africa's solemn obligations, and arrest Vladimir Putin. Well, that sounds so lovely if you're a Westerner. I mean, people who are standing up for the rules based international order, freedom, and democracy. It's in the name, after all. Now let's look at the leadership of the Democratic Alliance. They have 9 top federal leaders, 6 of whom are white. South Africa's white population is only 8% of the population. This is a little suspicious, to say the least.
You don't say.
Oh, yes, so it's that kind of situation, but clearly the South African government, at least as led by the ANC, deeply resents the fact that they have to do this. But because they're so indebted, particularly in foreign currencies such as dollars and euros, and therefore are constantly needing to or prospectively needing to go to the IMF, they don't have the sovereignty to be able to say President Putin is the head of state and therefore as long as he's the head of state enjoys diplomatic immunity and under no and he's Russia is also an ally of ours. Our militaries train together. Russia's very helpful to us. We do business with each other and we like the business we do, so we're not going to be hurting an ally, and we think these charges are politically motivated on bad evidence go away. They know that if they do that, that the Americans, rather than say, well, to each their own and sovereignty, because after all, we respect Ukraine's sovereign right to do what it wants to do and make friends with who it wants to make friends of, and who are we to deny that? Remember, this is the rules-based international order, not the law-based international order. And as our contributor Alcibiades said a few months ago in an op-ed that he wrote for us, well, as anybody who's ever grown up knows, rules are something set by your parents. And one of the first things that you learn as a child is that even though you are often wrong and your parents know what's better, your parents can change the rules on you when it suits them. So, one of the things that you learn by growing up in any family is that the world can be very, very arbitrary when it's based on rules instead of based on law. So, the French are going there to uphold the rules based international order as opposed to the law based international order and to try and break it up. And doubtless Macron will just want to talk about Ukraine because he's Macron. He's not going to be clever and be like, "Oh, what, you think I was here to talk about Ukraine? Oh, no, 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 no. Of course not. We'll save that for the G20, in which case I'll have plenty to say. But here there is a lot of trade I want to talk with you about cooperation between France and us and this and that and the other, which might actually work to break up BRICS more, because then the Brazilians, the Indians, the Chinese, the South Africans would listen. Oh, okay, he's here to just talk business. This is very nice, and France is a big market and sophisticated, and there are some products that we want to sell and things that we want to buy from them. Yes, let's talk. Like, no, he's not that. I don't think Macron is that clever, and we saw that with the mishandling of these riots. He's just kind of a jerk.
Wow.
Yes. I've definitely strategically placed the two most JM-centric topics at the front of the podcast. So me and Lydia could just kind of relax and listen.
Yes, that was actually very informative
It
as
really
usual.
was. Yeah. But what do you think about BRICS? Like, I'm kind of excited. They've only officially revealed that Algeria has applied. But they said what? JM 22 other countries have applied? And 40 have expressed interests or something like that?
I unfortunately do not recall off the top of my head. The two applications that I've been following are, yes, Algeria, but also Argentina, which is also quite interesting because it too is quite in hock to the IMF. But knowing Argentina, that's not a situation that much of their political class, albeit not all of their political class, like being in. And so they want to be able to align themselves with a group of countries that are going to be growing more quickly, that will allow Argentina to export more, and that also line up more with their growth profile, and also with whom they tend to enjoy trade surpluses or not so big trade deficits, as opposed to what goes on often with the EU and the US, which is not to say that Argentina doesn't have trade surpluses with some of those countries. It does, so much as all the money of Argentine oligarchs tends to go to those countries instead of in Argentina. Argentina is kind of like Russia, but without all the oil and natural gas, if you follow. So that creates a bit of. So the Argentines are constantly running into balance of payments problems, which have nothing to do with them supposedly being feckless, and everything to do with the fact that their elites have some weird stuff going on in their heads. So it's interesting to me that Argentina, despite being so dependent and still trading so much with the EU, wants to join BRICS, which is also interesting. I think that you might have seen over the past week that the EU had this big meeting with the Latin American countries, in which it showed, the EU touted as we're going to begin shifting their opinions by just laying out things for them. And the end result was they couldn't agree on a communique because the EU insisted on, language about Russia's war of aggression, and started throwing a fit when the Latin American countries said, we're not so comfortable with that. Could we instead say that we're worried about the war in Ukraine and that we hope peace will prevail? No, unacceptable. Because, once again, it's the rules-based international order, and this is again why I think France was ultimately not invited to BRICS, because they didn't want to listen to yet another lecture where they come and tell up, and where some Westerner tells them this is what you must do, and just kind of does so with a haughty arrogance of, well, because I've said so, surely you're going to do it. Surely you recognize my obvious superiority and how well put together my country is. And since you want to be like me, surely if you want to be like me and therefore be richer, you will listen to me, except it doesn't work that way anymore. And the EU and the US are going to have to go through this for a few more years before they start getting used to it. Notice that I didn't mention the British. Britain doesn't really factor into anything anymore.
Why
And-
not?
Yeah, why?
Because we left the EU,
Okay.
so therefore we're just not important anymore.
Lydia, what do people in Russia, do they talk about BRICS? Do they have a general overall feeling about BRICS? Is this something that's like hopeful?
I would say an average Russian person, it's not that we don't think about BRICS, but I feel like, we kind of have this little tiny thing going on in Ukraine, which is kind of taking up a lot of mind space for the people. But on a more serious note, of course, people are excited. I feel like if I were to describe the general mood, because BRICS is all about, economy, I would say that Russians are cautiously optimistic. Cautiously because, it's not the first time we've been optimistic and then we've been kind of let down historically. But I feel like people see Russia as this emerging power and they're hopeful that we'll be able to form really strong economic bonds and alliances and actually maybe become the superpower that people wanted us to become for a while. So, and definitely people see it as this kind of how do I put it politely? They see it as this fu to the West in a way, and which is also nice from the Russian standpoint. And so yeah, so people like it, and people grow. I feel like the general mood is that people feel closer and closer to these countries where before they maybe didn't think that much about them. When I say didn't think that much, I don't mean it as negatively. I mean it wasn't exactly on their radar, but people are becoming more interested in the geopolitics and the intricacies of all of that. So definitely Russians see it as a good thing.
Well, Lydia brought up a thing that we don't really talk about that much, which is that little thing that's going on in Ukraine that is weighing heavily on the minds of Russians.
We don't talk about that very much. We really should.
Yeah, we should give that a little bit more attention.
Just a tiny bit. I heard there was some type of an offensive going on. I heard different things. I mean, some people say that it's been going for a while. Some people say, it's not even exactly started yet. So, which is it?
It is whatever our wise
Mhm.
masters and truth purveyors in Kiev tell us it is
Correct.
at any one moment. That is what is going on. And
So we
when
will never
Ukrainian
know the truth.
Well, we might eventually when the CIA
This is
documents
your
get declassified. But I mean, while you were gone, I mean, you saw it. It was just a roller coaster of emotions. It was like the counteroffensive has started. And then it was like, wait, you guys rushed us into this counteroffensive. And then the West was like, no, we told you to wait. And you guys went ahead. And then it was like, we don't have enough weapons in training. And it's just like, back and forth this strange like blame game, and people are dying in the tens of thousands. I've heard the losses are enormous. Like it's just I'm not sure. So I'll let JM because I honestly don't I
Oh,
wasn't
it's even better. Both the Ukrainians and the West are saying the same thing, but at different times. So at various times, it's Western officials saying the Ukrainians should have attacked earlier, and Zelensky saying, I wanted to attack earlier, but you guys didn't give me enough equipment, even though he said earlier. Now, in fairness to Zelensky, he has always said, as he's always said, you haven't given me enough, I need more. But he did say that, therefore, since he hadn't gotten enough, actually, he wanted to delay the counteroffensive to get more stuff, or at least give his troops more time to train and plan and prepare. And the West keeps saying, no, you should have gone earlier because now the Russians were able to build these extensive fortified lines and lay out minefields. And both the West and the Ukraine are united on one thing. It isn't the Russian army that's doing this to them. It's a bunch of mines. Now, who put those mines there? I guess we'll never really know, given the way they talk about it. But I think that the Russian army might have something to do with it. Just a little thought that there's this little thing out there called the Russian army that might have something to do with it,
I
especially the 58th Army, which, for those who know just a little bit of recent history, is the army that destroyed Mikhail Saakashvili's very expensively built NATO trained and Ukrainian equipped army in
Mm.
2008, including some of the most celebrated units in the Russian army, such as the 19th Motor Rifle Division and the 42nd Guards Motor Rifle Division, both of which also fought in Georgia and therefore have a recent history of combat excellence. just a little thought right there, might have something to do with it. But no, apparently all the Ukrainians need is a bit more grit and equipment, and they'll be able to smash through Russian soldiers who defense experts and Russia experts, such as Mark Galeotti, writing in the London Times, assure me that the reason the Russian soldiers from these experienced and proven units are dug in is because they have low morale and poor training, and that is why Gerasimov has put them there, because that's the only way they'll stand and fight. Even though, and this is where I'm getting really annoyed here and starting to rant, the Ukrainians haven't even reached the first defensive line. The Russian fortifications, such as they're facing now, are actually the sort of field trench works that soldiers normally dig. They haven't even reached the fortified lines with the concrete pill boxes and the layered tiger teeth or any of that. No, they're out in the security screening zone in front of the first fortified line that the Russians took back in January of this year, and then got set ready to defend and did some more training. The fact that they refuse to admit this is really down to this one conceit that's really tying everybody up, including, of course, naturally, the Ukrainians, which is that people in NATO and Ukraine, because they're oriented to the West, have the right sort of mentality, and only they can possibly produce anything approximating military excellence. The idea that people with more Soviet mentalities might be able to produce military excellence simply does not compute. This is absolutely impossible. We would ground down and smash any dictator's army because dictators are bad, 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 bad people, and dictatorships don't produce good armies. The Wehrmacht says hello, by the way. So therefore,
Wow, controversial.
Spicy.
so therefore, what must be going on, we just can't figure this out, and we just need to do this one little thing, and the thing that we want to become true will become true, and they can't figure out that, no, it doesn't become true, and actually, you might have to reconcile to yourselves to the fact, speaking here more about NATO than Ukraine, because it's getting to the point, and we'll get to that when we talk about Odessa, where I think that over the next year we'll see that what Ukraine thinks doesn't actually matter very much anymore. It's never mattered very much anymore. Is exactly what was set out in the website engelsbergsideas.com by a British professor of war studies at King's College London. I'm very pleased to say here. That as in to say that a British academic is able to objectively set things out. But given what he's saying, I have a suspicion that he's been doing things like reading BD Geopolitics to get his ideas, and also people like Armchair Warlord and Big Serge, because we've been saying the exact same things. But that's by the by. We do very good work, and I'm very flattered that he did. And also, more seriously, he might just be doing some more of what we're doing, which is open source information. Did you know that? We don't have a deep line. We just look at things that are on the internet and news agencies. And from
Tell
that,
us how
form
you
an
really
analysis.
feel.
Don't tell them. Don't tell them that. My God, you take away the mystery. But you know what's really, I haven't been paying attention to the counteroffensive or the Telegram updates. I've only been paying attention to the Western coverage of the counteroffensive. And I think that's more telling than the actual footage of the stuff on the ground. If you know how to read, I think it's Brian Berletich, who like pretty much all of his sources are Western media. If you know how to read them, they will tell you a lot. You just have to read them the right way. And when I saw this headline that said, hold on, I have it. The one that said Ukraine's lack of weaponry and training risks stalemate in fight with Russia in the Wall Street Journal. I said, and the subtitle, the United States and Kiev knew of shortfalls, but Kiev still launched the offensive. Just the headline and the subline speak volumes about what's going on. If you understand how Western media works, I did read the article, but it just in the title alone, which, I mean, let's all be honest, when you're scrolling through social media or whatever, that's basically all you really get, unless it really piques your interest. But just the title alone tells me that this is not going the way that it was planned.
But to go back to a point that has constantly irritated me, which is that it appears from all the open source stuff that we can glean, from all the articles that were written by all the different connected people, from what people like Scott Ritter are saying, and Ritter would know because he did have to try and plan part of part of Operation Desert Storm and run these sorts of simulations, that when they plugged different variables into the simulation, each time it came out as the Ukrainians losing. So the only way this adds up is if you assume, as Mark Galeotti and Michael Kaufman and others keep insisting, that the Russians are poorly trained and with bad morale. Then you can force a breakthrough. Because with bad training and poor morale, all the firepower, the superior firepower that Russia has, will not be brought properly to bear on the, it is said, much better trained and Ukrainians with higher quality equipment, and therefore they will be able to break through. This is how they seem to have come to the conclusion that it would all add up. And it was on the basis of a very, very bad misreading of what happened, especially in the Kharkov counteroffensive, where they seem to actually think that what the super duper turbo patriots in Russia, and of course we're being very sarcastic when we're referring to people like Strelkov and like that as being super duper turbo patriots, that all of First Guard's tank army ran away in Kharkov Oblast in September 2022. It was a regular Second Battle of Kharkov from May 1942, I tell you. That's not really what happened. And even worse is that they appear to have misread what happened in Kherson, where they don't seem to have reckoned with the appalling casualties the Ukrainians sustained to do what they were able to do, and the fact that the Russians withdrew with their forces and logistics intact, not being harried very much by the Ukrainians. And that was because by the time that Surovikin advised Shoigu and Putin that it's really, if we better err if on the side of caution and withdraw our forces over the Dnieper because they could blow the Novaya Kakhovka Dam, and we've seen the effect that has had. And we might be fine, we'll probably be fine, but do we really want to take that chance? And they made the choice of, no, we need to preserve our fighting power, our manpower, as Brian Berletich said they would do, and as others said they would do. But yeah, they think they just focused on we successfully squeezed the Russians out and our guys didn't suffer that many casualties. I don't know. That must have been on the basis of what the Ukrainians were telling them, but even then, it's by not very carefully reading things, because if you read some articles from, say, the Washington Post, you would have known the Ukrainian losses that they were sustaining trying to inch forward in Kherson were enormous. But back to Betts, and why I think it's interesting, like in terms of Western sources covering the state of this. So, under part of this article where he calls conformation of the defense, he says, superficially, it is not that the Russian military is employing defensive fieldworks in a way that is particularly new. For example, consider these lines from an article by Colonel A. Lebedev in the Russian military journal Voyenная Мысль, entitled Permanent Defense Systems in Light of War Experiences. Impenetrability is secured by echeloning fire structure in depth and establishing fortified zones comprising several sections. The attacking enemy troops should be left with only one type of maneuver, namely a frontal blow aiming at a breakthrough. After breaking through the front and neutralizing the defense structures along the axis of his blow, the enemy is gradually drawn into a pocket, bordered by fortified structures echeloned in depth, compartments of terrain, and a second zone. As he has very limited possibilities to expand towards the flanks, he is doomed to destruction in that pocket by the fire and counterblow of the defenders. What he, i.e. Colonel Lebedev, describes as a fair description of the challenge faced by Ukrainian troops in armor today, struggling frontally through layers of mines and barriers, all the while being savaged by the missile and artillery fire of dug-in Russian forces. Except the article was written in 1945, and the war experiences to which he refers are those such as the gigantic Battle of Kursk, fought almost exactly 80 years ago in the summer of 1943.
I will say this. One of my favorite quotes from this, I don't know, couple of weeks that I read on the offensive was from Zelensky, where he said that Moscow might try to make the Ukrainian offensive difficult. Which,
Oh,
if you think about it, it's very rude.
it's very rude on Moscow's part.
He was just seriously so upset, and I was like, okay, I feel your pain. You're trying to do an offensive here, you're trying to make it successful, and Moscow just might make it difficult.
I mean, Zelensky is an actor. You shouldn't heckle them when they're on stage. It's very rude.
It's true. It's true. But yeah, it doesn't look like this offensive has been going great. Now I'm convinced, even though I've read some comments from Anthony Blinken, of all people, who said something interesting, I thought.
Oh, you mean namely that Ukraine will restart again and show results soon, and that we're in early days yet?
Yes, exactly that quote. Let me find it. Oh, here it is. He said, when they deploy and go into action, all the forces that have been trained in recent months, the equipment that we have provided them, and about 50 countries, and I think all this will make a significant difference and will lead to changes. What do we think? Will it lead to changes?
Um, yes, I mean, every new action always changes something.
Oh, come on,
Um,
show more enthusiasm than this.
okay, sure. Um, well, I guess to answer that question about the counteroffensive, I would like to, since I've spoken enough on this, talk some more about what's going on in Odessa in general, because that I think can help answer the question of what exactly is going to change if Ukraine does more stuff.
Definitely.
So, rather than starting with the missile strikes, or at least that's my point of view, Lydia, could you tell us a bit for our listeners for the benefit of what happened at the what is the significance of this cathedral that got hit and what's going on?
Well, even if we don't go really deep into it, first of all, it's a historic site, and I guess I should preface it with saying that Russians very much view Odessa as a Russian city, which I know some people, some pro-Ukrainian people might say, "Aha, those Russians imperialists," but it's not that. Historically, it was established by Catherine the Great, and so people feel that it's very much a Russian city in culture. It has a lot of historical value, cultural value, and Russians, if you know anything about us, we're pretty historically minded. And so another aspect is that that cathedral, even though it is Ukraine, technically in Odessa, it is um, under the Russian Orthodox Church. So it's not a part of the Ukrainian church, which is also another reason why people react very emotionally to something like this. And it was very strange seeing Dmitry Kuleba's comments on how, how they were hurt that Russians supposedly hit the cathedral, where I mean, if you look at what they've been doing to the churches, to the, let's call it for simplicity, to the Russian Orthodox churches, there are, and I guess something I want to say, that when I say Russian Orthodox churches, the way Russians see, they don't see it as like ours, these are our church. They see it as like ours, meaning that they're ours. They belong to the Russian people and to the Ukrainian people who have the same faith. And so this is our common heritage, even if some want to reject it, but it is what it is. And so definitely it makes no sense for us to target it. It would reflect very badly on us, and it's not something that we do. It's not something that we support, but definitely, I'm not gonna say anything, but I think we all understand who actually has no hesitations to do something like this.
I would say that the damage pattern from everything that we've seen about what happened to the cathedral doesn't reflect 500 kilograms plus of explosives, which is what is in a Kaliber or an Iskander cruise missile going into the cathedral, but rather a misfire from an air defense missile. Because some 500 kilo or even 800 kilograms of explosives impacting into that structure would look significantly worse. Like, you can compare the impact of buildings after confirmed strikes from Kalibers and Iskanders, like what happened to some of the buildings in Nikolaev, particularly the administration building, as compared to what has happened to the cathedral here. And I think we also know who has an incentive to do this, given what's been going on with the Lavra in Kiev. Before swinging
Exactly.
back to Odessa, could you tell us a bit about the emotional resonance of the Lavra? Because I've noticed that on not just Russian Telegram, but Russian official media, that there is a lot of anger about what's going on at the Lavra in Kiev.
Well, I think that anger comes from two places. First of all, as I feel that most of our listeners would know, in Russian we say about Kiev that Kiev мать городов русских, which is Kiev is the mother of the Russian cities, meaning that to Russians we view it as a significant part of our heritage. And when we talk about heritage, what is heritage? It's religious, cultural, and so that the Kiev Pечерsk Lavra, it's very much of cultural significance. First of all, even if someone is not Orthodox or not actively religious, it is cultural heritage, and so here's that. Another point, I guess that's going to be 3 points. I was thinking about two, but I came up with the third one. So the second point is that they see it as this severing of the ties between our people, between us and Ukrainians, which is also very painful because this conflict is actually very emotional and very painful to the Russians on that level. Largely, it is viewed by most Russians as civil war, and so they see it as part of the civil war. And then the third point is that, as some of our officials have stated, and I'm not sure, you can correct me on that, I don't know if it's already happening or it will be happening, but they're bringing a lot of the relics and things, icons from the from the churches to Europe to supposedly quote unquote protect them, but largely we see it as them stealing them because essentially it is not, even though you can say that that is Ukrainian property, religious things like that, they're not viewed as property of the government, they're property of the people. And so a lot of people have legitimate concerns that they will be lost to us forever, that they might get sold, they might end up in some private collections, they might end up somewhere where people will not have access to them. And so that is the third point, why it's such a sensitive topic, because we do have a history to where we had to actually buy our relics from the European auctions to bring them back to our country so people can have access to them. And I know to some people who are not religious, it might seem silly, and they might ask, because I've read opinions like that that might say, well, what is why is it so significant? But trust me, it is. To the people here, it is. And so yeah, that's that's why it's been a very, very painful process, even to, I know personally, even to people who are not exactly hardcore Orthodox, they still look at it and they're terrified by these events.
Well, let's take the religious part out of it, and even just location wise of where the Transfiguration Cathedral is located doesn't make sense for any sort of Russian missile to be in that vicinity. Could it have been an errant missile? Sure, but when we look at the pictures of the damage, it just doesn't coincide with a missile landing on that structure. I mean, that's feelings taken out of the equation. That's the fact of the matter. regardless of what the site was. And now when we add in all of the things that we just iterated, I mean, that just makes the case even stronger. Not that there's a point in even sitting here and saying, like, even arguing against it, because does it really matter in the end? Not really. The church will get fixed eventually. They're just on another one of their PR campaigns, and I'm not sure that this is even holding any water on either side at this point.
Well, out of
I do.
sorry, I'll just say, out of curiosity, I went and looked at the comments under Kuleba's tweet, where he's, complaining about how we, as the barbarians that we are, destroying churches and other important things in Ukraine. And you can see that a lot of the comments there are openly negative, and actually a lot of people come out and say that they don't believe in whatever Ukraine is saying, which to me is very interesting, because I view it, obviously, being Russian, I have a certain bias, no doubt. But still, I feel like if something like this was happening last year, I feel like there would be more positive response. I feel like more people would be trusting. But I feel like Ukraine is losing a lot of the credibility, and a lot more people, even if they lean more pro-Ukrainian, they're starting to have doubts.
What I was going to say, like in terms of the impact of the strikes on Odessa, is that it's interesting that two things. It was noted by one of the deputy chairs of the State Duma Defense Committee, but I forget which one. Very sorry to our listeners. Don't have that to hand, but that he said that in terms of a strike in retaliation for the second Kerch Bridge bombing, this is not it. This was planned. And also, what's interesting is that the Russians don't always hit Ukraine every night with a strategic strike. But not only have they been hitting Ukraine every night with a strategic strike, they've been hitting the same city and the same area of the same city now every night for about 5 nights with a strategic strike. There was a bit of a break the day before yesterday, but last night that clearly was lifted, and it's all at the port area. And this has all caused Zelensky to do two things: say one thing and do another thing. Which is not to say in a hypocritical way. It's something that he said and something that he did. What did he say? He said, without a coastline, we have no country. What is he doing? He's asking for the Ukraine NATO Council to convene urgently to discuss the supply of weaponry. This tells me that in the now 6 days since Russia has ended the grain deal, and since the port facilities in Odessa have been struck and other military facilities in Odessa Oblast have been struck, that some logistic storage areas, probably containing quite a bit of stuff, have been hit. And the Ukrainians desperately need to be topped up. Now, given what Biden said about what the U.S. providing cluster ammunition to Ukraine means, will they be able to do so? We shall see. But I have a feeling that it was a lot easier for NATO to get in masses of ammunition and other things through the ports rather than merely through the railways and the roads. So nothing will ever stop flowing to Ukraine, but I think we might, in a few weeks, if what I think is true, begin to see some downstream effects from this as it becomes more difficult to supply Ukraine. But you two might actually see something that I do not see.
Interesting point, because yeah, that actually might be true. Well, I was gonna say this. I feel like the intensity of the strikes, and the fact that they've been happening pretty much every night, just kind of tells me that Russia, obviously, has been aware for a while, kind of, where things are and what was happening, but was kind of, I guess, limited by the grain deal. But then once it was off, they're like, okay, fair game now. So
I think that there was an inevitability to an assault against or on Odessa in some form. I just think that the grain deal expedited that. It just is. I mean, I guess it is what it is. I don't.
yeah, that's kind of what I meant. That it was it was always, I guess, part of the plan. But now that we got the Green Deal out of the way, you know, it's happening.
Yeah, and I feel like now we might, that whole grain deal thing, I don't know if it's salvageable. Like, we might be too far past the point of no return for the Green Deal.
I think that Putin is being sincere when he says that if the West complies with its part of the agreement, then within 3 months, then we will return to it. I also think that Putin knows that given that the West are, and I think the Russian word is, Lydia, correct me here, недоговороспособны,
Yeah,
that
that was good.
that the date that the West complies with its end of the agreement of the grain deal will be the first of never. So the grain deal is dead. That's my judgment. I very rarely stick my neck out on making predictions, but that's my prediction. I'm pretty sure of this. The grain deal's dead. It's not coming back because the West isn't going to suddenly trip over itself and work feverishly to connect Bank to SWIFT and to make it much easier for Russia to export its grain and fertilizer. They're just not going to do that. That's just not who they are.
Also, did I just dream this, or did they say that if they were to reconnect Russia to SWIFT, that bank, that it would actually take months, or did I just read it somewhere? Did I just dream it? I don't know. I
Everything
think
is a fever dream right now. It's all, nothing's really real. So you probably heard it. So please.
could be
But
could be
but
just
but
too much sun on the vacation.
you heard it correct. This is why the original grain deal was for 6 months, because the undertaking was when Russia agreed to this back in June last year that of course we'll do that, but it'll take us 6 months, bureaucracy, this and that, and making sure that Bank and only Bank is reconnected to SWIFT so that you can't game it, so that it's only for fertilizer and agricultural products, but we'll work this, but that will get, and we need to figure out how we're going to set that all up. And then they just never did it.
Okay, then I'm not crazy.
Well, I mean,
But the West does like doing this gaslighting. Like they said that they would. Baker promised Gorbachev that NATO would not move 1 inch to the east, and they gave that as a verbal pledge, and then they said, "Oh, we never gave that pledge." And then when it was revealed in 2015 by documentary evidence that that pledge had been given, they said, "Haha, you should have gotten it in writing."
yeah. God, fooled you again.
Yeah, I
Silly
heard that a
Russia.
lot. Which I actually feel like, yeah, they should have, but that's a different matter.
Yes, entirely. So, I mean, then what's next? Do you think another night of strikes in Odessa, or we think that we're going to lay off for a little bit?
I personally think that they will continue, but I don't know. I'm no military expert. That's just my feeling. I'm a woman. I have feelings, so that's how I feel.
I'm just glad you're not in charge. That's all.
Hey, I'm more sane than a lot of people who advocate for like immediate nuclear strikes whenever there is a drone flying over our borders. So here's that.
I think in terms of things going crazy, that there are two other things that we could touch upon, which is the Swedish embassy getting burned in Iraq,
All
which I hope
right.
somebody else has information on, because I have not been
I
following that at all. And also what is happening with everybody's favorite historical reenactor.
well, I feel like all of the uh turbidity in the Middle East is all kind of related together. So we have this Iraqi protesters, rightfully so, or well within their rights, went and protested at the Swedish embassy, obviously against the recent Quran burnings. So they burned the embassy. I don't know if it was burned to the ground, but it was significantly damaged, and the Iraqi government expelled the Swedish ambassador. Again, I don't feel any way about it. I'm not like, go Iraq, or that's messed up, shouldn't have happened to Sweden. I mean, it is what it is. You play the games, you win the prizes, you do what you need to do, you go home. So that's basically what happened. But at the same time, we also have Iraq making strengthening their partnership, where they always have had a decent relationship with Syria, but strengthening their relationship with Syria, making a statement against Turkey in regards to the water, we'll call it water battles for now, because it's not quite a water war in that region on the Tigris and Euphrates. We also have Turkey upset. So all of these things are kind of intertwined. And then we have America, who says, you know what, in the midst of all of this craziness, we're going to deploy more ships to the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to make more, we're going to annoy Iran a little bit more. We're going to start picking apart things that are going on in the Middle East. The Arab League is starting to come together. We're redeploying more troops into Syria to protect our interests in the Idlib area and all of that. It's all happening at the same time. So I find it very worrisome, because I think that it won't be an outright war, because Americans will never go for another war in the Middle East. Not right now, anyway. But they'll be putting boots on the ground in Syria and ships in the Strait of Hormuz for a reason, and that's to start stoking the fires over there. I also heard a theory. Now, this might be tinfoil hat, so please forgive me, it's not my own theory, but that Kissinger, he recently visited China. The man is 100 years old. So for this man to travel to China requires a good deal of logistics, a medical team, etc. What was so pressing for this man to go to China and speak directly to Xi? Well, one theory that I heard was that he went over there to basically say, like, we're going to start something in the Middle East. Please stand down.
Interesting. I haven't heard much about this situation. I guess, I was more, when I was reading the news, I was more focused on other things, but that is really interesting indeed, if that's the case.
Well, I don't know about that theory, but even just the aforementioned stuff, it's like all of these little things. I mean, the Middle East is not quite the powder keg it used to be, but there's still potential there. And the United States knows enough about that area to know how to exploit those little potential, like those little bits of potential. So I
I
worry, especially about places like more unstable, like Syria. I worry about places in Lebanon, and then them using Iraq and Iran to further destabilize the Levant in order to protect their interests in Syria and Israel.
Could be. I also feel like, how do I put it? I feel like a lot of the times the whoever is running the U.S. Policy, they're not exactly rational. Let's put it this way. So I feel like it might be that they see that they're losing in Ukraine. Let's call it for what it is. I guess, I feel pretty confident saying that. So they might feel that it's kind of, their old stomping grounds in a way. So it's a region where they could have some success historically, I guess. So that might be that too.
Well, sure. I mean, it's kind of like, we're going to go start some trouble over here. So then it will give us a good enough reason to say, hey, we've got a thing we've got to take care of over here in the Middle East and Levant. So we're going to have to like put this hot war in the freezer for a little bit.
Yeah, and if you think about it, the West is all about the optics. I mean, they're about other things, but they care about very much about how they look. So, yeah, that not that I think about it, actually makes a lot of sense.
I try to stay out of Middle Eastern politics as much as I can, but given the fact that the United States, given that Syria has been readmitted to the Arab League, and given that the Syrian civil war has gone on far too long, I would just say this is a hope. I just hope that we would just withdraw from eastern Syria and just get out. There's no reason for us to be there anymore. It's over. Such as regime changes we attempted, we lost. And also, the whole politics with all the refugees fleeing, that's because the area is at war and destroyed and is destabilizing the politics of Europe. Get out so that Syria can rebuild and some of those people can go home. And I think we'll find that everybody's lives will get easier. That's my hope. Will it happen? No.
I think that's probably a really good note to end it on. Our second podcast, 2 out of 3 or two out of 4 podcasts have now ended on the note of Syria. So, I mean, if we could keep this going for like in perpetuity, that would be great.
Yes, let's just hope that we'll eventually have happier things to say about Syria
We will.
and the prospect. Yeah, I'm hopeful too.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. If you want to listen to us or read us drone on more and more and more, please subscribe to our Substack. Almost all content is free. That's the best way to support us. If you'd like to check out some of our community projects, please look at them on our Twitter page for our community sponsorship in Yemen. Thank you so much again, Lydia and JM. And this has been another episode of the DD Geopolitics podcast. See you all next time.